So I'd like to go ahead and get started and welcome everybody today to our panel on equity in the outdoors. Once again, just as a reminder, there are two functions that are available for everybody. First is chat. You can double click on that on the button on the bottom and you can share your thoughts and comments as we go through the panel today with all the panelists as well as the attendees. And second, we have a Q&A, a question and answer button on the bottom. Please double click that and enter in any of the questions that you may have for our panelists. During the second half of the panel, we will be sharing those questions out with our panelists so that they can respond. But we have a really incredible panel today. We have one additional panelist today, Arlie, who's a current student. They'll all be introducing themselves, but I just wanted to note that she's an additional member of today's panel. Our panel today is going to be moderated by Matthew Toms, and I'm going to turn it over to him to get us underway. Matthew.
All right, thanks, Scott. I'm super excited to have this group of people here talking about this subject. It's really exciting. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Matthew Toms. I'm the director of our student assistance program here at the White Mountain School, which is our in-house counseling and support program. I also run our White Mountain Scholars program, which is a newer program. We started it last year, and it's a program to really empower our students from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds in boarding schools. I also run our whitewater kayaking program. I lead field courses and other trips. And I've been at the White Mountain School for about 17 years now, I think. And it's the school and its community is something I hold really dear to my heart. So let me just to introduce this topic. As I mentioned, I'm really excited to have this wonderful panel of people here with us today who bring a wealth of experience professionally and personally in the outdoors, in advocacy work, in equity and inclusion work. And there are so many benefits to spending time outside, to adventuring, to being in nature. It is also, however, no secret that the outdoor world has been inaccessible and exclusive to, and in some cases openly hostile to different groups in this country. Last night, we had the wonderful opportunity to hear from Mina Valerio, who eloquently talked about the ways that she has tried to make the outdoor and the natural world more accessible and inclusive for people. So in this panel discussion today, we'll hear from WMS alumni and one current student about their professional and personal experiences with equity in the outdoors, how they've worked to make the outdoors more equitable and accessible in their own lives, and how their experiences at WMS help to shape how they view, create, and embrace equity in the outdoors, both professionally and personally. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll just call on you, and I'm just going to go across my screen, no particular order for anybody else. So Estefania, you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you, Matthew. So I'm Estefania Rodriguez, I'm class of 2010, and I am currently in Ithaca, New York.
Great. Amy?
Hi, my name is Amy. I'm from the class of 2014, and I am currently based out of Boulder, Colorado.
Arlie, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Arlie, and I am a current student at WMS. I am from the Bronx, New York.
Great. Joanne?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanne Kilgour, class of 2003, and I'm currently in Northeast Pennsylvania.
Great. Jan?
Hey, folks. My name is Jan Wojciechowski. I'm class of 2008, and I live down in Asheville, North Carolina.
Great. Thanks, Jan. Aaliyah?
Hi, y'all. My name is Aaliyah. I'm class of 2018, and I'm from Maine, but I'm living in New Hampshire right now.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. So just to get us started, I'd love to hear from you all, and to hear a little bit about why the outdoor natural world is important to you, and maybe some experiences you have that reinforce that importance. And feel free to popcorn this out.
All right, I can get us started. So like Aaliyah, I'm also originally from Maine. And growing up in Maine, I never really realized what a luxury it was to be surrounded by so many diverse places to get outdoors, and really began to appreciate that, learning to fly fish with my dad and my grandfather, and hiking and swimming throughout the summers. And then my brother got really into rock climbing, and that's how he actually found WMS first. And so I followed him there and really began to appreciate how you can integrate the outdoors into everything else that you're doing, from educational experiences to working through emotional challenges, or any kind of life experiences, and have carried that through with me. And actually, it led me down a professional path of going into environmental law, and then from that, really just seeing how there is this underpinning throughout many of our civic structures that also dictate our relationship to nature and the outdoor world, and also who has access to not only our democratic structures, but also our natural resources and quality of life. So it's been an evolution over time, but I think that's really been a great sort of through line for my life, starting in Maine and ending up down Pennsylvania, which is under much scrutiny for our connection to the extractive industries. So,
Awesome, thank you, Joanne. Who else? Why is the outdoor world important to you?
So like Joanne just said, I grew up in Maine, so I grew up with the outdoors all around me, and inherently it became important to me because it was a huge part of my life. And I think only recently have I been reflecting on that in college as I'm studying therapeutic use of adventure education, and really just breaking down and thinking about how people and the natural world are connected and so heavily rely on each other and are intertwined, and how affected we are by the natural world. And I think a great example of that would be the natural disasters that are occurring all across the western part of the country right now. And I was just really intrigued that there is an area of study that would focus on how we feel because of that and how we're connected. And that idea has led me into personal passions of climbing and recreating, etc. But I think that thinking of it in more of the psychology area is what is really interesting to me.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
I can go next. So I grew up in cities, big cities. So I was not a fan of the outdoors at first, but it was through White Mountain that I started going camping and fishing and just being outside. And at first I was a little resistant, but I think over time I started adapting and really seeing the value that you can get from being outside, from, self-growth and like pushing yourself, going whitewater kayaking when it's really scary and just paddling through, and how that has translated into other parts of my life. That kind of mentality of just keep pushing, you'll be fine, just don't stop. To also, just like Matthew mentioned at the beginning, the benefits of being outside, cognitive benefits for your emotional health, for your physical health. And so I think over time, I have felt those benefits. And so now the outdoors is very much an important part of my life, both personal, but also in the professional sphere. I hope to figure out how to use my knowledge and my skills there someday.
Thank you, Estefania. Yeah, who else?
I can happily share a little bit about how the outdoors has helped shape me as an individual. And I think, like a lot of folks on this call, that started at White Mountain School. And I think originally the outdoors was a great outlet for probably some teenage angst that I'm sure you probably remember, Matthew, and maybe some other folks on this call. But more than anything, I think it's a powerful tool for development, both personally and at this point for me professionally. I've woven the outdoors into my professional trajectory and career over the years, and that's been incredibly valuable in developing me in really interesting and competitive ways that are quite unique. And so I do truly credit the outdoors and exploration in the outdoors and the White Mountain School's outdoor ethic at a lot of my personal and professional development over the years, which has been really exciting and really fun. And I'm now in a position with what I do professionally to help facilitate that for others, which is really great as well. And hopefully try to encourage other folks to experience the outdoors in ways that I think everybody on this call has in unique ways.
Thank you, Jan.
Similar to most folks on this call, I sort of grew up with a curiosity for the outdoors, sort of born from my surroundings. And growing up on a river, I had access to explore each bank it surrounded, the ocean that it fed into, and that curiosity birthed also this self-discovery. And I was able to learn a lot about myself through how I had basically through my relationship with the outdoors. And then again, similar to most folks on this call, White Mountain allowed me the opportunity to explore that more and identify that I wanted to figure out a way that I could share this with others, specifically those who traditionally don't have the same access I did. They didn't have a childhood memory where they got to splash around a river, and for what reason that was, I wanted to make that accessible. And so specifically my work is with people with disabilities and trying to get them the same kind of access to curiosity and self-discovery that I found as a child, and then as an adolescent, and now as an adult, still finding and taking advantage of what natural spaces do for me personally and now professionally.
Great. Thank you, Amy. All right. Arlie, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I guess for me, like similar to Stefania, like I've grown up in the city, so I wasn't really exposed to any of this before I came to WMS. And I honestly like dove in, like went into WMS just like trying anything I could. So like my freshman year, the fall, I came here and did rock climbing. So every year I've just like taken on like different outdoor sports, and that's like with the mentality I went into like things with. So yeah, honestly, it's just been very helpful in like helping me, you know, push past my limits and like just, yeah, like really just take advantage of the opportunities I got here. And yeah, like I'm just so glad I like kept doing that throughout my years, because it really has like helped like develop like me, like you guys kept saying, like personally like growing and like, you know, just yeah. And it also like really relates to like other parts of my life too, and like yeah, but, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Arlie, and thank you, everybody. This is clearly like an area of your lives that is that's really important. We're going to shift gears now. We're going to talk specifically about equity in the outdoors, and I'd love to hear from you some examples of when you have experienced equity and accessibility and seen it with your own eyes, either personally or professionally, when it's done well, like when people have felt like there is access and like there is inclusivity. Yeah, and again, feel free to just popcorn out when you're ready.
I can start by giving an example of a place that I hold very dear to my heart. So Costa Rica, so back in the 1940s, about 75% of the country was covered in forests. And then over the next 40 years, it was heavily deforested. But Costa Rica really had an incredible turnaround. And part of the reason why is because they had a program that focused on conservation of the natural world. for a lot of reasons, but one of them was for tourism. And it seemed to me, at least, I'm not an expert in it, this is just from when I went to Costa Rica. They don't just listen to the experts, right? So they're working with people on the ground. They're working with indigenous people, they're working with women, they're working with the people who live in these places. And they try to figure out, okay, what do you need? And how can we get there by also taking care of our environment? And I think that has translated into what is now, based on my perspective, this socially ingrained respect for nature, and this idea that the natural world isn't there for us, you know, that we have to coexist with everything else that is on this planet, in Costa Rica, and we have to respect their lives and the way that these other creatures live. And you can see it in, like, when I was in Costa Rica, I saw it at all levels. So I saw it in the education system. So they really seem to emphasize biodiversity and conservation, and this idea that it's not our nature to exploit. We have a role in it, and we have to be responsible for our sake, but for the sake of all these other species as well. But also in tourism, so actually my tourist was a Colombian guy, so he wasn't even from Costa Rica. And he too had this, I don't know what to call it, this way of thinking of nature first, conservation first. We're not going to do anything that is going to hurt what is already here. And I was really impressed with that. And it was just very powerful, because Costa Rica went from, you know, deforesting a lot of their country to reforesting it, and even more impressive, causing this social mental change in people that ranges, you know, from whether you're from Costa Rica or you're an outsider or you're even a tourist like myself. So I thought that was a really good way to cultivate equity, you know, just by listening to everyone and really trying to understand what do you need so that you can be okay, so that we can add this into the equation and understand that it's all related, and we cannot come in from the outside and say, no, you can't use these resources because of these reasons, and we don't really care what happens to you. That doesn't seem like the right approach. And I think Costa Rica is an example of that.
Estefania, thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like a really beautiful experience, being there and being part of that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. What else? When have you seen it done well, right? Like, when have you seen inclusivity and a welcoming approach and equity done well in the outdoors?
So one of the first stories I heard about an accessibility issue in northern New Hampshire was when an Appalachian Mountain Club hut was either built or renovated. And when they made the renovations, they included a wheelchair access ramp. And it was one of the most remote huts in New Hampshire's wilderness and forest area. And so there was all this pushback about, why would you go to these lengths to build something that nobody would be able to access? And while it was such a controversy and that could be seen as negative, I thought it was a great form of equity and inclusion, because in the year 2000, people were like, you know what, we're going to build this wheelchair ramp, and we're going to not create assumptions, and that maybe a group of people can enjoy this who use mobility devices. And of course, there's always going to be a group of people with disabilities who see that argument and are like, oh, I'll show you. And so University of New Hampshire's Northeast Passage got a group together, multiple people in wheelchairs, multiple people with crutches, and they made the 20-mile or so trek up to this hut, and they wheeled themselves up that ramp, and they enjoyed all the accommodations the Appalachian Mountain Club had to offer on that day. And I think it sort of begins with that, the not making assumptions about what somebody can do or what somebody might be interested in. It's just having the door open and the window of availability there. And so there aren't any hoops to jump through necessarily. And you might think, well, 20 miles through the wilderness is certainly a hoop to jump through in a wheelchair. But you'd be amazed by how people can find access to the wilderness and how people can build a relationship to that despite how they get around. And so that story in 2000 was really a moving one for me, and really inspired some of the passion that I have today for it. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be learned from a story like that. Create access and the people will come.
Thank you, Amy. That's super cool. What else?
I can go next. So that kind of reminded me of like last year when at school, a couple of students started a student of color affinity group sport, which, allowed like, students of color who identified, or also like students from like low income backgrounds. So there was like one day skiing, one day like swimming, and then another day rock climbing. So it just like, brought like in a lot of students who never like skied or like, swam before. And yeah, like they tried it out for the first time, and like a lot of people like really liked it. So I feel like just putting the opportunity out there definitely can make like an impact. And yeah, I feel like promoting like that accessibility is really important, especially in like a place where we do have the resources to do so, but also like yeah, like just making sure that like students who want to try like get to. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And not only, I was fortunate enough to be of that sport as an instructor, and not only was it awesome because there was an access piece, but it was probably the most fun I've ever had. We just every single day was super enjoyable. Great. Any other examples that people want to share?
I can share just a short example. In my previous work, I was the director of the Sierra Club's Pennsylvania chapter, and a big part of our work was an outings program. So actually intentionally trying to get our members and other folks outdoors. And Pennsylvania is really lucky to have a tremendous state park system that's free for both in-state and out-of-state users. And so one of our goals was trying to get more people to be familiar with the parks in proximity to where they live and kind of understand what the offerings were. And looking around when I first started, a lot of our Sierra Club outings were very homogenous. So it was like a trending older white crowd, a lot of folks who like to just sort of have that quiet, solitary experience in the outdoors, and yet a lot of the amenities in our state parks are great places to bring a family and have a picnic and barbecue and also do some hiking or use one of the boat launches and rent kayaks. And so we were trying to figure out how can we make our outings more attractive and accessible to not just our own membership, but also others in the community. And in conversation with both the state park system and some of the folks who we were hoping to work with, there really was this barrier of assumptions sort of on both sides. So assumptions about what the experience would be like of joining a Sierra Club outing, and also assumptions about what participants are, generally in that audience. And so we expanded our outreach and included something called a community agreement in our outreach, which was basically a document that we had all of our participants agree to and actually sign and submit the same way that you would sign a liability release form or something like that. And it was a signal that we were being intentional about the kind of behavior we would and wouldn't accept for groups of people in the outdoors. And everything from keeping assumptions, in the parking lot or outside before you get there, and a recognition that everyone would be, treated the same way and given the same opportunities to participate. And that we heard from a lot of people that the fact of that community agreement was one of the things that encouraged them to participate when they hadn't participated before, because they felt like they were going into a safe space and would be welcomed, and that their particular identities or backgrounds or experience level wouldn't be a barrier to being welcomed into the group. And that was a really sort of a turning point in our outings program, because that just created this snowball effect where once more people felt comfortable participating and had good experiences and knew that there was actually an accountability mechanism, that it wasn't just being taken on good faith, but it was something that everyone actually had to affirmatively agree to. it created just a really great opening and completely transformed our entire state outings program.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you, Joy. And that sounds like a really phenomenal and successful program. All right. At risk of cutting somebody off, now we're gonna flip the script a little bit, and we're gonna talk about when you've experienced a lack of equity, right? Like when there has not been inclusion, and spaces have not felt welcoming, either personally or in your professional lives. Yeah. So the floor is open.
I can start again. So I guess in talking about access to the outdoors, I think we should also talk about economic accessibility to the outdoors, because I know for me, that was definitely a big barrier. So when I started at White Mountain, we had the OLEs, the field courses. And I remember when I showed up to our pre-OLE meeting in my jeans and like cotton sweatshirt, and I was told, wait, what are you doing? Like, you're supposed to have all these things. Here's the list of things you need to be in the outdoors. And I remember going to like Lahoots or whatever it was, and a shirt or a pair of pants was crazy expensive. I don't remember the price, but I remember going there and thinking, I can't afford this. I just cannot buy these pants. I can't buy this jacket. And thanks to someone at the White Mountain School, I was able to get the equipment that I needed. But I think that's definitely a barrier. You know, if you don't have the right equipment, the right gear, you put yourself at risk if you go out there and you don't know what you're doing, which was my case. So I think that, you know, when we think about equity in the outdoors, we also should think about economic accessibility. And it's not just about the gear, it's also about transportation. I think that's a big issue as well. Like a flight to, let's say, Yellowstone, I don't know how much it is, but a family of 4 that's a low-income family is not going to be able to do that. So just for me, that has been like the main barrier in accessing the outdoors, the economic barriers of transportation and gear.
Thanks, Stephanie.
I can share a little bit too, and you know, some of that kind of builds on what Estefania was saying about distance, and the distance that people need to travel to recreate outside. And where I'm at right now in the Southeast, a lot of recreation opportunities are in really rural areas, and a lot of those rural areas are a pretty far way off from some of the metro centers, and that's certainly a barrier. But the other barrier there is kind of the stigma of what it is to travel in rural America, especially rural Southeast, and that unfortunately can be a really negative and scary thing, and something that I'm still kind of coming to terms with the fact that I don't really have to experience as a white male. Like it's relatively easy for me to go travel in the rural Southeast and feel safe, and that is not, frankly, the case for a lot of people, especially women or people of color. And there was actually a really good article in Outside Magazine, as well as several other articles that have been published recently about the idea of traveling in outdoor spaces and rural spaces, and how the idea of safety there can be very different depending on what user group you're part of and your level of comfort. And I think that's a huge barrier, and one that is going to probably take a really long time to break down. And unfortunately, that's like a full stop barrier for a lot of people. No, I can't go do that, or I won't go do that because I'm not safe there. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Thank you, Jan. Other examples of inequity?
Building off what Jan was talking about, I work also with our state Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and they oversee all of the state parks management and state forest management. And we're talking about trying to increase kind of BIPOC participation in state park activities. And Pennsylvania is very similar to the Southeast, where the reality is some of our state parks are located in areas where it would be irresponsible to tell a Black family or an undocumented family that they could travel there and experience the state park in a way that would be safe and comfortable. And so one of the roles that I unfortunately had to play was just being really real with the state park managers and saying, representation is one thing. They wanted to add, pictures of people of color in the specific state parks and in a very tokenizing way. And I, not even understanding that that's not just irresponsible, but that's actually putting people's lives in danger. So I think a big part of what we have to be honest about when we're having this conversation around equity in the outdoors is a responsibility not just to promote access to outdoor activities for all people, but to do so in a way that's responsible and safe. And unfortunately, sometimes even if they're well-intentioned, sometimes the tactics that we have or think about are actually, potentially doing more harm than good.
Yeah. Thanks, Joanne.
Something I've taken away recently from my work with adaptive rock climbers is that, kind of going back to those assumptions that people make. And so something that we hear a lot in the adaptive recreation realm is you see somebody with a disability outdoors and an able-bodied person responds or admires them and says, wow, you're so inspiring. I can't believe you're out here going rock climbing, right? And to many of us, we're like, well, that's actually something sweet to say. But what that's really saying is, you don't really belong out here. Wow, it's really surprising that you made it out here, right? And so creating a norm where it's completely average and expected that everyone can have access to the outdoors is sort of the bottom line. You start there. And when you go into those spaces and you tell somebody how inspiring it is that they're there, they A, think that they don't belong there, and B, is sort of discounting the work that they had to put in to even get to that point, because they did have a lot of barriers to get through. But they want to belong there. They don't want to be a token. They don't want to be something that is obvious to everyone around them. And so we see that a lot, even just in the climbing gym. Somebody is climbing and they're visually impaired and, they're being gawked at. They can't just enjoy their rock climb. Right. So we see it there. And then another thing is, kind of getting down to the nitty gritty is, a lot of our outdoor spaces just aren't accessible. And thinking how it begins with, skiing, for example, that's one of the, it's inaccessible for a lot of reasons, but it's a pretty popular sport. And last year I decided to go sort of incognito in a sit ski. So essentially I'm in a seated position with skis underneath me, and it's something that someone with paralysis would likely utilize to go enjoy your local ski area. And the experience was completely eye-opening because while I've taught plenty of adaptive skiers, I haven't just gone in a sit ski and skied a mountain without my uniform on to see how I would be treated. And granted, so you pull up to the ski area, and for everyone here, you probably just boot up, get your skis, you're on the chairlift in 15 minutes. Someone who's in a wheelchair has to find accessible parking if it even exists, if it's not already taken or the ski area hasn't used it, just to buy more space for the general public. Then they have to get out of the car into their wheelchair and somehow get their sit ski to the snow. And most shuttle services don't provide a wheelchair lift, so they're getting there manually. Then they finally get into their sit ski and they go into line. When I got into line, I had to go through these narrow gates that automatically scan your pass, and I couldn't fit with my outrigger skis in each hand and my sit ski, which is quite large. And then the scanner was too high. It was at my head level, so I couldn't push up to scan to get even into the lift line. So that's over an hour's work just to get to the chairlift. And then a lift attendant yelled at me because my adaptive companion had to scan my pass for me because I couldn't do it myself. And that was against the rules. And I said, well, how does somebody with a disability get onto the chairlift? And she said, well, you can get one of those helmet season pass holders. I'm like, okay, so in addition to my $4,000 sit ski, you're now asking me to go out and buy this piece to put on my head because you don't have accessible options in place. And you're holding up the rest of the line to give me this speech. Right. And so that's just one experience. And that was my experience as an able-bodied person undercover. Right. These are things that people are facing in their day-to-day life. And, what can we do better? And so I certainly see it a lot. But it kind of takes stepping into those shoes and the awareness to change those things at their mountain, and so now I can go to management and explain all of this and hopefully it will change, but it's slow and it really starts with awareness. But those are a few things that I've faced and it's definitely upsetting.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And
one thing I just wanted to add really quick, or something that came to my mind, is thinking about, as Stefania was talking about money, and the cost of being in the outdoors is outrageous and is one of the main divides, I think, between accessibility and the outdoors. And I was thinking about the White Mountain School and how a lot of students are coming from inner city areas and how they haven't had that much experience climbing, and then thinking about climbing gyms and the sort of trend that goes along with the pop culture aspect of climbing gyms in inner cities and the expense that exists there. It costs upwards of $100 to attend a climbing gym or have a membership there. And then gear, et cetera. And so I think that's just an issue in equity I'm thinking about, is, introducing people in cities at least to the idea of recreating before or climbing before we take it into the mountains or anywhere else. And just trying to provide, more financial accessibility there to a location that should be pretty easy to access, right? It shouldn't cost $100 to go to a climbing gym and own a pair of climbing shoes and, pull on some plastic holds. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Aaliyah. Any other thoughts before we shift gears a little bit? When you've either experienced or seen lack of equity? Okay. And I'm sure there's plenty more examples. But thank you for sharing, again, snapshots, just to share with our viewers and with each other, just reminders of how inaccessible the outdoors is in so many, across so many realms. I do want to pause here and actually ask Scott, looking at the time, I have plenty of other questions that I'd love to hear more about, but do we want to open up the floor for questions?
So we don't have any questions yet, Matthew, so keep going. And I encourage all of our attendees to go ahead and enter any questions into the Q&A box, and we'll jump into those in a couple of minutes.
All right, awesome. So one of the questions I have for you all is, and some of you have alluded to this already, but I'd love to hear from you. How would you like to see the outdoors become a more accessible and inclusive place? What steps would you like to see take place? Or how do we create change in our professional, volunteer, personal lives and behaviors to make the outdoors more accessible?
One thing I've been doing and trying to be more conscious of in my professional world is, there are plenty of white able-bodied people in our nation that are making decisions for people of different groups. And so what I'm trying to do is just elevate voices that need to be heard in order to create a more equitable and inclusive space in the outdoors. And so whenever I get the opportunity, I'm leaning on my friends with disabilities to use their voice and promote their ideas and their thoughts on what we can do better as an organization, and therefore that organization impacts hopefully the general public in greater spaces. And so wherever I can, I'm sort of muting my voice and elevating those voices of folks who don't have the same privilege and access I've had to the outdoors for my life.
Great, thank you, Amy.
Yeah, I think one of the big pieces that's missing, especially in the whitewater world, which is a world that is still near and dear to my heart, and one that I'm personally and professionally active in, is advocates in equity and representation at levels of leadership and power. And I think that is hugely important, and that's all along the scale, I think, of outdoor recreation, but within whitewater specifically, looking at instructors or guides who represent groups that are typically not, widely seen in some of these outdoor areas, helps to break down some of those barriers and again, create representation. And then, I think that all flows downhill in some ways. If we look at it from a a marketing aspect or getting the word out aspect. As soon as there's representation, it then allows, I think, people to be inspired and feel like there is aspirational components of some of these activities that they can then connect with, and helps eliminate some more of those barriers in one way, shape, or form. And so I think the short of it is creating advocates in equity, and creating those advocates and having that representation in places where they can maximize impact. It's almost like the old saying, teach a man or a woman to fish. And I think that certainly applies here. If we can see greater representation in terms of education in the outdoors, we should be able to help push representation in the right direction.
Jan, can I follow that up with a question? How are you all doing that at the Nantahala Outdoor Center?
Yeah, I mean, in a couple of specific ways, we're doing that. Number one, and probably the most relevant right now, is we've recently expanded physical locations in the Atlanta metro area. And one of the goals with expanding on the Chattahoochee in metro Atlanta was to bring recreation closer to where people work and live. And so I think that in and of itself breaks down one of those big barriers we've all been talking about, the idea of distance and inaccessibility, right? Like, to go whitewater rafting with Nantahala Outdoor Center, it's going to cost $60 a head, and more. Probably, more of a barrier for a lot of folks is it's a long weekend in the mountains of Western North Carolina. So let's remove that second barrier, and let's reduce that first barrier by now making recreation within Atlanta city limits relatively inexpensive, so under $30 a person, and something that's an easy commitment for an afternoon. And that helps open the door in a lot of ways. I think in terms of representation, honestly, we haven't really cracked that nut, and it's a huge work in progress, and it's really hard, especially at some of our locations that are very, very rural. It is very, very challenging for us to grow diversity within the organization, and it's a very real challenge, mostly because we have to bring that diversity in from other places. And back to my original kind of comment around the stigma of rural southeastern US, that there are a lot of barriers there that are very, very challenging. So we're working on it. I feel like we're making really great steps for 2021 in terms of being able to really change how we recruit and try to bring employees in really measurable and targeted ways. But it's an ongoing challenge, and one that we're continually looking for better ways to do that.
Thank you, Jan. Inspiring. What else? What do you want to see? What changes?
Thing that we've been trying in Pennsylvania is an outdoor core, where there are 2 different age groups, and it's really trying to connect people with jobs in the outdoors in almost in like a fellowship model. So they're well-paying but hourly positions, and there's like an under 18 constituency, and then an 18 to 24-year-old constituency. And it's through a partnership with the SCA to try to organize these kind of non-traditional opportunities to get paid relatively well for a summer position and be able to work outdoors and experience different educational opportunities, as well as the benefit of seeing what kind of careers are possible in the outdoors. And that's been a really successful program, in part because, a lot of the internships or early jobs that you can get that have a nexus to the outdoors either don't pay well or don't provide other kinds of benefits that are necessary for access. And so, thinking deliberately about bringing some of those attributes into what we would consider sort of entry level or summer seasonal work has been really great. And one other quick thing is just like the idea of gear libraries and sort of community-based centers where you can actually, have increased access to shared gear. I think over time, it feels culturally like we've become more and more sort of consumer driven. And I think that there's also this really great model of being able to have, those kind of libraries and do it in a responsible way that also expands access. So those are just two things that we've been looking at here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Joanne.
I just want to make a comment. So in my own personal experience with my own family, right, I feel like when I say to my family, let's go for a hike or something like that, they look at me like, are you crazy? And I have to kind of sell it to them. So I think that one thing that would really help make the outdoors more inclusive would be to make these outdoor spaces more culturally relevant, if that makes any sense. So maybe having some kind of event at a local state park, and it could be like a culinary experience, or it could be a small festival or something to get people in a safe way, of course, into these spaces. Because I know for me, for example, for my family, I've had to sell it to them in different ways so that they can see the value of, why would I go on a mountain with you, just the two of us, and like a water bottle? Like, what happens if I break a foot? What happens if an insect bites me? What happens if somebody comes out of the bushes? Like, so making those spaces safe, but I think also making them culturally relevant would be important. And I don't know how to go about doing any of that. It's just a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Estefania.
Estefania, I'm curious, do you feel like, I know COVID, and I hate to shift this conversation towards COVID, but it's obviously something that's impacted outdoor access and outdoor usage pretty significantly in the last 6 to 8 months. I know COVID has affected different communities in very, very different ways. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. But do you think that COVID at all has played a role in making the outdoors more relevant or more culturally relevant for groups that maybe don't see, necessarily don't have necessarily a drive to go hike a mountain? Like, has that changed anything for your family and how they utilize outdoor spaces?
That's a really good question, Jan. So yes, and that's actually one of the ways in which I've been able to kind of sell this idea to them. So my mom and my aunt just went hiking, I think last weekend on their own, like a small hike. And that was a big deal for all of us because they were a little more resistant when we have, proposed going hiking together before COVID. But I think COVID definitely has changed the way at least my family thinks about the outdoors, because it's an escape almost. It's a breath of fresh air. It's being outside when you can be outside in a safe way. So for us, at least for me and my sisters and even my cousins, we've sort of talked to my mom and my aunt, and we said, look, I know before you've been resistant to this idea of hiking, but we're there. And look, it's a chance to get out, from our homes. We spend 24/7 in the same four walls, and to get a breath of fresh air. So it's definitely, in a weird way, helped the outdoors become more relevant, at least to my family. I don't want to speak for everyone, but at least for us, it has.
So we do have one question that just came in, and I think it'd be a nice way to sort of wrap up today's panel. And the attendee was curious to know, what was each of your favorite outdoor sport when you were at White Mountain?
Or outdoor spot, like place on the White Mountain School campus.
Right.
I can go first. So for me, definitely it was last year when we did the student of color affinity group sport, and we did skiing. Like, it was just like, I don't know, just all like people trying it for the first time, like experienced people, like all, like, sorts of color. Like, I just felt like it was the community. Like, it was definitely like, we were there like supporting each other. I just thought it was just a really amazing experience, just seeing people progress and seeing myself progress along with like others, not feeling like ashamed, right, or intimidated of like how, like, what if I fall, right? So I just definitely felt like that group of people like really supported me and like making sure like I progressed, and also just the energy was amazing. And yeah, so that's by far was like my favorite like sport. like skiing. And hopefully, yeah, we're having it this year too. So I'm also like really excited to do skiing this year with like the affinity group. But yeah.
Arlie,
And Arlie, what's your favorite location on campus?
Outdoor
Outdoor.
location.
Yeah,
Hmm.
or nearby. Doesn't have to be just on campus.
I mean, I really like the climbing gym. Like, I don't know. I feel like I've especially when it was like when I used to go there a lot, like last year and like in the beginning of the school year, like I would always bring like friends like who haven't like done rock climbing and like ever, and just like, you know, just seeing people get on the wall is like really it's nice. So yeah, I definitely would say like the climbing wall.
Arlie, I'm psyched you brought up the student of color and skiing specifically. Like I've spent a lot of time at ski lodges in my life, and they're traditionally white and wealthy spaces. And having the crew of students of color from White Mountain School just come and take over the lodge and just take it by storm and own the place, like, you know, blasting bachata and like, and by the end, like really taking ownership for that space. That was really a cool thing to watch, and the supportiveness of each other as y'all learn together. And Arlie, you got good. I love it. You got really good.
Thank you.
What else for folks? Favorite outdoor spaces on campus or activities?
I'll share. The pond is by far my favorite spot on the White Mountain School campus, and I'm not sure if it's what the rules are about accessing the pond now. I know when I was there, it was on the edge of being out of bounds, but I think that's why it was so fun. And it kind of had this representation of spring, because as soon as it was warm enough, we would all go jump in the pond, and that felt like really gross, but also really exciting because it meant that, you know, spring was here. And well, as much as I loved school, school was over. So yeah, that's my favorite spot.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
I definitely, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
Really quickly, I'll just say I second the pond. And when I was there, I didn't ski, but I did Aikido. And we used to go out during the winter and do sword practice on the pond, which is still like one of the most magical things I've done.
Thanks, Joy.
Now I wish I'd gone to the pond. I never went to the pond, but for me it was the hotel area, just because, okay, so this is a time in my life when I was a little bit afraid of being in the outdoors. Like that's probably why I didn't venture into the pond. But I like that area because I remember that's the first time when I saw a shooting star. And so for me, that will always be like one of those memories, like the first time you see a shooting star, and it's just so incredible. So for me, it's definitely hotel. That's my favorite spot. And sports, strangely enough, whitewater kayaking. I tried a lot because I was afraid when I did it. And I could never get like the eddy lines. I would always flip. So I just like, eventually I just embraced it. I was like, this is happening. It's okay. I'm not going to drown. But I think kayaking has just taught me so much about myself. And it's just, I find myself thinking about that experience a lot. So I think that's why kayaking, even though at the time I was afraid of it, it's my favorite sport.
Yeah, and at risk of going over, Estefania, I certainly remember when you first got to White Mountain. I was your advisor for 4 years, and when you first got to White Mountain School as a ninth grader, you just hated everything about being outside, and you and I would go head to head every time before an OLE and after. Like, why do we have to do this? Why do you force me to do this? Yada yada yada. And I, right alongside those are some of the most memorable moments I've had with White Mountain School students outdoors were with you. You know, I remember sledding at night at Mount Eustis, and the time in the Ottawa where you swam puppy chow, right? Like, and you and I have talked a lot since your time at White Mountain School. And you've repeatedly mentioned that, like, I'm glad you forced me to do this stuff, right? Like it didn't feel good and it wasn't very accessible. I look back at some of those moments, and Jan, I'm sure you remember this too, as well. But, you know, in the Whitewater program, for example, like we were like, hey, you know, jump in the river and keep up. And if you can't keep up, like, you're going to drop out. You know, we've shifted our tune quite a bit. Like one of the things I certainly learned a while ago is that, like, why were no students of color participating in whitewater kayaking? Like, a bunch of students of color couldn't swim, and so like we started doing swimming lessons, and you know, Arlie mentioned the student of color sport. Like, that's a key part of it, and over time our students of color have grown in our whitewater program, and we've tried to make it more accessible. Like, there are more females and males in whitewater kayaking now, and so I'm glad you brought up some moments at the White Mountain School. Sorry, there's a vacuum in my house right now.
I can happily share my favorite. I think one of my favorite spots on campus was the farm, and spending time on top of that hill. I actually haven't been to campus in quite a while. I'm assuming it's still there, but I need to come back and visit. And then my favorite sport at White Mountain was always whitewater kayaking, yeah, I think it afforded me to go a lot of really cool places, both at White Mountain and after. And I'm lucky to be in a place now where I can really start to put a lot of hopefully hard work towards continuing equity and access for that sport in particular. It's an interesting sport. It's a very niche sport, but it's still really important to me personally to see participation and representation in it grow.